stuff. You know, they're like, they've got us sussed from the minute that we meet them.
Oh yeah, it's
It's
90%
so
toil. And then they hug you on, say they love you and stuff, and you go,
okay then. Yeah.
all right,
well,
Yeah.
I'll forget that you threw the remote on my face, so I won't give you some squishies or squashies or whatever they're called.
it's the bedtime routine, and that's what kills me.
Is it?
The monotony every night?
It is monotonous.
Oh,
Is it like bath, story, bed?
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's a lose-lose situation.
No, because for me, it's like within 30 to 40 minutes, the day I'll be free of them again until tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I like
Really selling it, aren't we?
Yeah. I'm like,
focusing on the end goal.
yeah.
No, like when it gets like, because my youngest goes to bed, I take her to bed at 7, and so at 6 o'clock, it's like the relief starts to come over me, I think, right? Because my 6-year-old, she's quite self-sufficient, so she'll be nagging me for like sweets or like watch this video with me or whatever.
Yeah.
That she's shown me like 50 times. But the other one is just, I want, a sandwich.
Everything.
Do you though? Yeah, I want a sandwich.
A fish finger sandwich, you've got to put the grill on.
Yeah, she'll be screaming at me to make this sandwich, and I make the sandwich, she'd take one bite and be like, I don't like it. I want ice cream. And I'm thinking, where does this end? You know what I mean? Like, get you the ice cream, but
You're too soft.
The question is, where does it come from? That's the question, isn't it?
what do you mean?
Well, I want a sandwich. You make it. I don't like the sandwich. I want ice cream.
Yeah.
Get the ice cream.
Yeah, you're saying like I'm facilitating that behaviour.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not
listen,
really
don't call
saying
it out,
that. I'm
Tanya.
just.
No, listen,
Wow.
right. I wouldn't class myself as strict, yeah, but I probably have been quite firm at times, maybe too firm, right? But eventually, you get to a point where you just think, it's a battle I don't need to fight. Do you know what I mean? I used to be very much like, when it's dinner time, I put the food on your plate, I expect you to eat it all. Like, and I've grown up in a household where like wasting food's like something that we don't do, right? So I just become fixated on this thing about like finishing your meals. And then I just stepped back one day and I was like, look, my job is just to provide the food for them to eat. Whether they eat it or not, the food is there. They only go 20 minutes between meals pretty much anyway. Why am I getting so upset about, because she didn't eat all of her chips, for example? So then, and as soon as I was able to let go of that, everything's just better.
Life is easier.
Life's easier.
Sweet.
The relationship with the kids is better. The anxiety around dinner time goes away.
You've been brought up with values that you don't waste food, that you eat your food.
Yeah,
You make the
but
most
this
of
is the thing.
resources you're given.
Correct.
Yeah.
But what I realised is those values that were instilled in me were in a different time and a different generation where food wasn't so abundant and so cheap, and I'm being raised by a single mum and blah 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 blah. Right now it's like, it's food, everyone cares. It's just different, Even like my mum, right? My mum, yeah. And this is when I really realised it. My mum, she put a pizza in the oven for someone, maybe me or my sister or whatever. We'd already eaten, we didn't want it, right? So she took that cooked pizza and froze it, right?
Good.
And I was like, why are you freezing it? She's like, well, I don't want to waste it. I said, Mum, it's like a £1.50 pizza. Yeah.
Does it?
It's not going to taste that good when you're probably going to end up binning it anyway, because no one wants that now. They want a fresh one. And you've got this mindset from like 20, 30 years ago where food is like this precious resource. It's £1.50 pizza, mate. It's made in the factory. Like, who cares? Just get it in the bin.
Like,
Yeah.
Not even. It's just,
I'm with your mum. I would have frozen that pizza.
would you?
Yeah, I definitely would.
Nah.
It does make you think about, food scarcity in some parts of the world, doesn't it? And, we are very, very lucky that we can just walk into a shop that's not very far away from us and get food for not very much in comparison, where in some places that's just not the case, is it? So I get where your mum's coming from, but I also understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So it's finding the balance, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, that is tough.
But it goes back to what we were talking about in the car backs about values and core values and having those, but being able to say, right, well, that no longer serves me.
Correct. Exactly.
And that's absolutely fine, and be at peace with it. Let it process it, let it go, and then just flex a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's now moved into your flex. It doesn't matter if you don't clear your plate, it's fine.
Yeah.
As long as you've eaten something, I've provided something.
Exactly.
You're fit, you're healthy.
And I'm still going to encourage you. Like, I'd prefer it if you ate the food, right? And I'm annoyed that you're going to say you're full, which is a lie, and then 30 seconds later you're going to come in and be going, I want some chocolate or whatever. And then we'll get into this little back and forth from like, well, finish your food, then you can have the chocolate, but I'm not hungry. But you are, because you want chocolate, and chocolate is also food that will go into your And then I just think, I'm not going to have an argument with a 6-year-old.
It's negotiation at this point.
Yeah.
We've gone into a different podcast altogether here. We're not parenting, but let's pull it back. Welcome to the podcast, Tanya McCalmon.
Thank you very much.
Have I done that right?
You have, yeah.
That was right. That was spot on.
No, because you said McCalmon.
McCalmon.
Yeah.
Yes. See, I'm happy. Tanya, give us a little 30 seconds about yourself, what it is you do, who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I am an inclusion consultant, and I work with small to medium-sized businesses, helping them to create that culture of inclusion within their organisations.
Excellent. And bring that to life for me, watchers, listeners. What does inclusion mean for a small business like us? We're Spectrum, we're 60 people.
Yeah.
What does inclusion mean for us?
Inclusion's really about, for me, inclusion's a practice. So it's a practice that is intentional. So people need to be committed to it. They need to be intentionally being a part of it. But I think what it encapsulates is this idea of everybody being able to come to work, be themselves, be fully supported, and be able to thrive.
Okay. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, but so
right off the bat.
I'm going straight in, aren't I? Why should small businesses care in the nicest possible way? Well, let me ask you, rephrase that actually. Is it top of the priority list for MDs, boards of small businesses? Are you finding when you're speaking to them?
I think it's a great question, Stephen. I think it's a really good question for people to ask themselves. Why should I care? Because for me, the question is, how could I not, or why wouldn't I care? Because it's any business is made up of people, and where you've got people, you've got culture. Yeah, so you'd want that culture to be a good culture, so that people want to be at work and your business is doing well. So really, for me, it's more, why wouldn't you care as a small business if you want that business to stay relevant and be an attractive place for people to work? Do I think it's at the top of people's agenda? Yes and no. I think it's becoming more so for small to medium-sized businesses. So we've seen, large businesses and globals, multinationals, it's very high on their agenda, and they've got teams in place, global diversity leads, people and culture teams working to make sure that everything is as good as it can be, and it's a process. And I think for small to medium-sized businesses, sometimes they don't see it as being an issue for them, so it's like, we don't need to worry about it because we're just a small or medium-sized business. Others do want to do it, but they don't know where to start or how to start. And I think for me, when I dig deeper, that might be the initial, well, why should we worry about it? That seems to be masking a deeper, how do I do this?
And then so how do they do this? Where is the starting place for, I guess, assessing how inclusive you are as an organisation?
Yeah, well, you've said it there, that word assessing. So it's, if I'm working with an organisation, the starting point for me is, well, let's lay it all out on the table and let's look at where you are. Because with diversity, equity and inclusion, and again, we spoke about this back briefly, is there's no one size fits all. There's no package that you can pull off. It's like diversity, we'll apply that and it's job done. So you really need to look at all of your systems, all of your policies, speak to your people, so that you know what that temperature's like within the organisation. You've got a baseline from which you can then start. And it's important that you get that, because if you just look at what somebody else is doing and try to apply it, it's not necessarily relevant. So do that deep needs analysis and do the cultural audit.
And is that what you do? So you go in and you speak to stakeholders, you speak to
so speak to
colleagues.
all the start off with start off in the C-suite really.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have that buy-in, I've found, from the very top, because it's that level that's going to drive it. And at the end of the day, they're the gatekeepers as well, aren't they? Because if they're not signing off on those decisions that mean that resources are available, it's impossible to make things happen. So you've got to have that buy-in. That can often be a sticking point because not everybody is.
Yeah.
So it's really about helping people to understand what is your why. Why do you want to do this? And once people have got that why, it gets the momentum going a little bit. So it's a lot of reflection, sometimes difficult conversations, but then getting that buy-in and then driving it through the business. Having that first audit where you just look at absolutely everything, way that you're recruiting, your hiring practices, look at your policies throughout the business. Do you have the policies in place? And then when you've got those policies in place, are they inclusive? Or are they potentially leaving people out? And where that happens, again, it's not because people are intentionally on a mission to exclude people, but it's implicit. It's happening because they can't see. We don't know what we don't know. So if we don't have that perspective, then we're limiting ourselves, aren't we, in terms of what we have an understanding of. So once you've done that audit, then I would work and say, right, let's put together a strategy. So what do you actually want to achieve? Again, it goes back to that why, but this time at an organisational level. So what's the company's mission? What's the company's vision? And then how are you going to get there?
Yeah, because you make some really good points there. I think we touched on this outside. It's like this thing of it becoming performative, and I think that if you go up to like the major corporations, your Apples, your Googles, etc., I do think that is a little bit performative, actually, to the extent that they're going to.
What word are you using?
Performative. So it's like it's a performance, Right. We're talking about like
it's disingenuous.
In Hollywood, you're seeing more and more black people being, I would even say, like injected into narratives and stories where they don't necessarily belong. Maybe even Hamilton to a degree, right? Because it's kind of a weird, you've got
Black George Washington.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like, I'm pretty sure he had a couple of slaves, So. But then you could make an argument that like, well, it's almost like a fake it till you make it type scenario, maybe. Like you almost have to play out what the ideal is until and that kind of feeds down and that becomes more normalized, that then people just do it out of habit rather than feeling that they have to force the situation. Because I know our own MD obviously wants inclusion and he, but he's probably hesitant because he doesn't want to feel like he's doing it as a performance or just for the sake of it, and like for me personally, it's like I would never want to feel like I was hired for a job because I was there to tick a box. I want to be hired on my own merit and my own ability and skill, and etc. etc. And I think for me at least, and I don't know about you, maybe for other people, just speaking from the perspective of like being black, is like that almost makes me apprehensive to want to see these sorts of things come into effect, because I just feel like, is it a bit of a slippery slope? It's like allyship is a good thing. It's something that we should want, but then it's like people just pick it up and run with it and they go too far and then it kind of gets uncomfortable and you almost feel like you're being used. I'm being used as a way for someone else to uplift themselves and feel better about themselves, and that's not really an area that I would want to get into. I mean, what do you think to that? Obviously you're in the thick of it, so do you ever think those things?
I think there's definitely a lot in what you've just said there, a lot to unpack. And so the first thing that you said is that there is a lot of performative action taking place. We saw external events happen in 2020 and since then. So we've had, the death of George Floyd really put things into the limelight from a diversity, equity and inclusion perspective. It's not a new thing, is it? It's been around for a very, very long time. But it really brought it to the fore because everybody was at home. Everybody was watching TV, even though I don't have a TV. Which
have a TV?
Yeah, Bax finds this like
We'll come back to this.
Yeah.
Carry on.
But I knew what was happening. I do get my news. But yeah, so we've had that, and then we've had the pandemic. And we've had the people working from home, and so there's been real shifts where people have really reevaluated what's important. But I think when it came to a head in 2020 with the death of George Floyd, and then we had the Black Lives Matter movement happening, there seemed to be a lot of response to that, where I think CEOs felt like we're going to have to do something. We need to be seen to be doing something. And so it was a little bit of action and a few events being run and a few statements being posted, but nothing lasting. And that's what happens when it's not tied to your strategy. It just becomes an initiative, and then that's when people start to lose faith in, is this really changing? Because the issues that we face are that are really going to make the change are systemic. It's the inequities. It's not just about one group of people. It's about inclusion for all. So without us embedding it into what we do on a day-to-day, so that it does become culture. This is what we do around here. This is how it's done.
Yeah.
That takes time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you've kind of got to go through that process of, this is where the intentionality comes in, Bax, because you've got to do it. You've got to be modelling it. You've got to be practicing it. You've got to be nudging people. You've got to be reminding people, keep having the conversations, challenging yourself, pushing yourself out of comfort, until it becomes the norm. And it's like any new habit, isn't it? I mean, the number of times I've started at the gym, and then I can't get the habit. I cannot develop that habit, so it's just something that I do. Whereas my dad, 40 years, it's what he does. It's part of who he is. It's just not in me.
Yeah.
But I would need to be really intentional. I would need a coach. I need somebody to come and pick me up in the morning, take me, drag me into the gym, talk me into it, have a nutritionist. I'd need the works. But eventually I think it could become a habit. And it's the same thing. It takes time.
You need to be deliberate initially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi guys, just jumping in. I want to talk about one of the services we offer, which is robotic process automation, also known as RPA. That is software that replicates human behavior. So if you've got people downloading spreadsheets, attaching them to emails, going on portals, downloading information, moving data around, all that stuff is perfect for a robot. So if that's interesting, get in touch. Let's have a chat. Let's see if we can help. Enough from me. Back to the conversation. We've talked. You said at the beginning you're inclusivity consultant.
Inclusion consultant.
But inclusion. But we've talked about diversity as well. Are the two one and the same, or can you have an inclusive culture without having a diverse workforce? If that makes sense.
I mean, diversity is a given. Because every
individual,
every time if you've got two people in a room, you've got diversity. But when we talk about diversity, I think sometimes again we go back to this. Okay, well, we've got this group of people and this group of people and this group of people, and if everybody's in that group, we kind of consider that group to be quite homogenous, but it's not, because within that there's diversity of thought. People have got different lived experiences, even within that group, that may look the same or come from a similar background. So diversity is a given. You can increase that diversity. You can be intentional about that if you recognise that, hold on a minute, everybody has the same kind of educational background. Maybe we need to get a different perspective. So you're intentional about your hiring and bringing in some diversity from that perspective. Inclusion then is when you not just have the diversity, but you then enable that diversity, and you can leverage that diversity for the good of every individual present and the business.
So I want to explore that kind of being deliberate about for example, recruitment, being deliberate about the habit initially, because people are so different. It is kind of, where do you stop? So we need a left-handed person, we need a right-handed person, we need a black person, we need a white person, we need an Asian person, we need a woman, male. Everyone's different. So how do you make sure that you have that diversity without having literally a tick box?
Which it can become. Absolutely, and it goes back to what do you want as an organisation? So what are your values? We could say, if we just kind of make it really easy, and we said 50% of the population's male, 50% of the population's female. Let's just say that for argument's sake. But you have a business and 90% of the organisation is male and 10% female. Why? Why is that? So that's probably it could be a result of implicit bias. So people who are hiring a male, they are not necessarily looking at the merits of the females as much as they are the males, because there's that affinity as well. So these things creep in and they can impact the way that people perceive another person, and then that affects the decision making. So by diversifying your hiring managers, you've got, or your hiring team, you've got that diversity of thought, so people can see, well, hold on a minute, are we favouring this person for a particular reason? Are we being fair and equitable in this process? Because you've got more perspective there.
So is that one of the practical things that businesses can do then, in terms of that hiring process, making sure that the stakeholders involved from the recruiter side are diverse in terms of individuals?
Yeah. Okay. And that's just one thing. But I mean, if you're thinking about your recruitment process, it's looking at the whole process. So that's just one part of it. But you'll notice when you have, let's say you're recruiting and you get 50 applications for a role. Where are those applications coming from? Are they all coming from the same place? First of all, are you going out to a recruiter, and is that recruiter diversifying their search? Because if not, they're all coming from the same pool. Yeah. Again, it goes back to, are they all coming from the same kind of educational background? Yeah. Are they going and cherry picking from certain universities? And then that's your talent pool, isn't it, that you're looking at, your candidate pool. So you're starting off with a not very diverse pool. Whereas if you expand that search, you do outreach, you're encouraging more people to apply. So it's not that you are then saying, right, well, we need you and we'll pick you because of X, Y, and Z on this list. It's just that you're widening the search so more people with the right skills are applying for the job.
What? I don't know if do you watch Jordan Peterson? Have you seen Jordan Peterson?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and he's very controversial at times. I know you watch a bit of Jordan, don't you? But one of the things I've seen him talk about is where you've got like engineers and there's a majority male, and that's because, I don't know, is it right brain thinking, they're more right brain than left brain? I can't remember the difference. And then you've got nurses where it tends to be more female. And then there was this debate: should you kind of enforce a more fair split between the two? And I think his view is that people are kind of naturally right-brained and naturally left-brained in terms of male or female. What's your view on that? I'm intrigued.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think we are socialised to be certain ways. I think we're socially conditioned, and that has been part of the problem, and why this kind of stereotypical men are engineers and women are nurses and carers has been perpetuated, because we do as a society push boys into the sciences and we push girls into kind of the arts or humanities. Less so now. I think there's much more awareness that actually we can have girls in science and technology, engineering and maths subjects, and also there are boys who are interested in humanities, and it's just allowing for that, isn't it, rather than manoeuvring people into certain destinations, and then those destinations, whether it's engineering or healthcare, become saturated with a particular demographic, and then you get to this point where it's like, oh, hold on a minute, there are no women in here, or there are no men in the room. What do we do? How did we get here? And what do we do about it? So you've got to then go back a few steps and look at how you can change it, because it's not as if there aren't women who want to go into STEM, and it's not as if there aren't men who want to go into caring professions. It's just the perception. And it's overcoming. It's challenging those. Those norms again, isn't it?
It's really nuanced and complicated, isn't it? Because my gut is that there's an element of both things at play. I do think that there probably is a proclivity for, because at the end of the day, like, it's not that we all shouldn't be treated. I nearly said treat equally.
Say tret.
Yeah.
You're using big words today. Proclivity.
Proclivity. Thank you. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. I just found that one yesterday. No, I think like we're not all the same, but we should be equal and we should have equal opportunity to do what we want to do. I personally do feel that there is a difference in the way that the male brain works and the female brain works. In general, it's not always going to be the case, right? Which then kind of like, all right, so maybe guys are going to be more likely to go down this route, but then there's this reinforcement that happens on top of it, which then almost makes it like a bit of a monopoly where it's like, right, this is just exactly how things are and how they'll always be. Because I also think that like there are lots of different areas within STEM or within healthcare. It's not all just about like, I'm going to be in a lab, just tinkering with stuff. There are different elements, like different ways of thinking and skill sets, and it comes back to this diversity and sort of inclusion where people could bring value to those environments, but the focus just very much comes down to women are more caring, and in these industries it's all about looking after people, therefore women go there, or women are drawn to that. But and even now with like advancements in technology and stuff like that, I think we chatted on a previous podcast about this so-called soft skills and hard skills, and like soft skills becoming more and more needed because a lot of things are being automated and stuff like that, and like not being able to have to communicate with people and have a positive interaction with people in a workplace environment is now, another big word for you, detrimental.
I know that one.
To that scenario. So I think and again, I think generally as a society we have this need to oversimplify everything. It's like, I remember, probably in my early 20s, like you discover a new concept or an idea that really makes sense to you, and then boom, that's how the world works now. Like I'm totally committed to that idea, and call back again like to what we said about your culture and your values and your beliefs. You should be open to them changing. You should be open to being challenged. It's not about right or wrong. It's just about what's the greatest benefit to everyone involved. And same with the inclusion. I don't think it's necessarily a case of, you've got to take active steps, but ultimately create an environment where people are welcome, and you will start to see more people from diverse backgrounds appearing around you. It's like I ain't got a big word for that, but it's just like a good thing,
It's a natural progression, isn't it?
Yeah.
From creating, and that's what you've just described there, Bax, is my approach is create the culture first, and the people will come.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, how can you hope to attract talent? So, you've got a diverse group of people, and that's absolutely fine. So you've ticked that box, right? But that's all that's happening. So they're not included in conversations. They're not included in decision making. Nobody's asking their advice about this particular issue that they might have some experience of. And eventually what happens is you just think, well, what's the point? Why am I here? What value? It goes back to that value, doesn't it? Of what value am I adding to the business, and what value is the business adding to me? How am I growing in this business? How do I fit into it? Because ultimately we want that sense of belonging, and I think we could push it even further and talk about belonging, because that's ultimately what we want. We all want to belong to something. Now, I'm sure there's none of us around this table that's not had the experience of working somewhere where you just think, no, it's not for me. What is it about that? If I was to ask you, Steve, what was it about that experience that was the critical point? Then you said, no, enough.
Yeah, I think it's something that builds up, isn't it? When the culture's not right, and I'm all about change and transformation and doing stuff, and you've got working a culture which is slow and bureaucratic and hierarchical, and it can be, I guess, clashes with your values, and therefore then you just think, actually, I need to go and do something somewhere that I'm going to be happier.
Yeah, somewhere that I can do this and I can belong and I can be me and I can be authentic and I can bring my ideas to the table and they're valued and the business moves forward because of that. Not just yourself, but that collective sharing of ideas and perspectives that moves things forward because you've got more innovation, more creativity.
So what you've talked about some of the kind of practical things that businesses can do in terms of inclusivity and diversity, in terms of the recruitment process, making sure that we're broadening the pool. When it comes to culture, creating that culture, what are the things that businesses should be doing to create an inclusive culture?
I think a lot of it comes down to listening. So actively listening to what people need in order to feel included. Have you heard of the concept of psychological safety?
Yeah.
So if you can create psychological safety in teams and within the organisation, then people feel like that they have that inclusion safety, that they've got the learner safety, so they can they're free to learn and safe to learn, but also safe to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And then they've got that contributor safety, so they feel like what they say is valued and can be brought to the table, but also that challenger safety. So if you disagree with something or something's not right and you want to speak up about it, you can also do that without any detriment. Okay, so if you can create that in an organisation, and that's about being open, it's about being vulnerable, it's about not wanting that hierarchical leadership that seems to me to be very much on its way out, if not almost there, because more and more organisations have got flatter structures, which is making it's kind of laying the foundation, isn't it, for that inclusive culture to really start to come about. But you've got to be intentional, you've got to be willing to be open to people challenging you, you've got to be open to not having the right answer every time, and for somebody else to be brought in because they might know different, they might not be senior or peer, but they've got that perspective.
I think you must have a tough job selling this, because I think leaders, all of them, like to think they've created a culture within their business which is inclusive, which I would love to think, I hope to think that people in my team feel the psychological safety that they can come and tell me bad news, because that's what I talk about a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But I think you must find it difficult, I'm imagining, for leaders to acknowledge that actually they haven't created a culture which is inclusive and diverse. And it's
not for me to convince anybody, and let the data speak for itself, because you do the surveys, you ask the questions and you get the feedback, and what I do find is that people are more likely to tell me than they are to tell their manager or the CEO. So it does come out, and then it's a case of, well, are you as a leader open to that being the case? And then do you want to do something about it, or do you want to continue believing that this is the case and keep doing what you've always done? You might have done, but ask the question, because making those assumptions could take you into, it could just lead you into a space where you don't want to be.
Yeah, I think you're right as well, because it's like the tricky part is, I'm thinking if I'm a leader, or if I put myself in the shoes of a leader, it's like, you've got to have like a big enough reason to want to do it, right? And so, like, is a leader sat there one day and just thinks, do you know what, like, it's not very inclusive around here, and so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again,
sometimes
that's maybe that top-down thing. Like, there will be people, because they'll have moments. I think there's an exposure element to it. My interactions over the years, working at companies and freelancing and stuff like that, is like, we probably just take for a given that people have got groups of friends that are kind of diverse already, and then often I'll talk to people and it's like they don't know any black people, they rarely interact with any black people, so they're just not even thinking about that, and then that can bring up all these kind of awkward scenarios where they're not really sure what to say. And like, I knew someone who like wouldn't refer to me as black because they felt like that was somehow had some racist tone to it, and I said, well, what colour are you? And they said, oh, I'm white. So what's the difference then? Like, why can you be white? I can't be black.
We can't ignore it. We've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, haven't we? And what you said there is really interesting, because I use that as an example for people and say, well, here's a piece of paper with a list of, characteristics, if you like, and I'd like you to write down the number of people in your social circle or professional circle that that kind of match those or people that have those characteristics, and it's when people realise, when they look down and go, actually, my circle is quite limited in terms of its diversity, and what's that stopping me from being able to see? So it's never a criticism from my part, because that's just where people are. And I always want to meet people where they are and then say, right, we can move forward from here, or we can move to a different space from here, but there's no judgment.
It must be different geographically around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to a guy last week, in fact, about this very thing, and he'd had a day of, it just felt like he'd been exposed to diversity and inclusion all day, and you could see his mind just going into overdrive. And he said, when I was at university, I had a very diverse group of friends, and I was living in the city, and I was mixing with lots of different people. And then met my partner, we got married, we had children, and we moved. And they've moved into the suburbs, and that's not diverse. There's a lot less diversity, and particularly in terms of like race and ethnicity. There'll still be diversity in that area, but what I'm saying is he doesn't have access now as easily to people that he would have had access to. So he doesn't have those perspectives. He doesn't hear those lived experiences. So it's harder for him potentially to empathise as well. And that's what he was finding, and he recognised that. And so it's moments like that make people think, oh, hold on a minute, I have been kind of closed off and protected almost from this, but I can see it, and it's those little things, they add up, and eventually people are ready. And I often say, it's like, for me, it's a bit like therapy. If you are not willing to accept that you need it or that it could help you, you could have the best therapist in the world. They're not going to be able to do a thing for you because you're just not open to it. It's the same with this. My job is not, I refuse to make it my job to change people's minds. I will educate them, I will help them to understand, I will share information and resources, have conversations, but I am not on a mission to change anybody's mind. If that happens along the way, great. But it's hard, isn't it? You work in transformation, so you know how hard it is, Steve, to change people.
It's the people that's the hardest bit, to win their hearts and minds.
You've got to let people see what the benefits are for them.
Okay, me again, just jumping in to talk about one of the processes that we often get asked to automate, which is the processing of supplier invoices, also known as accounts payable automation. So what does that mean? Well, most businesses receive invoices from their suppliers, and a lot of businesses still have people that are manually reviewing those invoices, making sure that they're correct, making sure they're accurate, and then manually rekeying them into a finance system or an ERP system. Well, our solution can automate that process. So typically an invoice will come in, we'll use capture technology to understand what's on that invoice. We'll then match that data up against goods received note to make sure that we've received the product. We'll match it up against purchase order data to make sure that somebody has placed an order for that product. And ultimately, if we can match that up, we can automatically push that into an ERP system or finance system, and nobody has to touch it. How good does that sound? If there are exceptions, if there are things that need to be checked, that's fine. We can use digital workflow to push that to somebody to eyeball it and say, is this correct or does something need to change? Ultimately, though, that can then be pushed again into an ERP system or a finance system. This is about making your life easier. It's about making operations as quick and as efficient as possible. And we do that all the time. If that sounds interesting, then get in touch. That's enough from me. Back to the podcast. Yeah. I was thinking the same as Bax, actually, in terms of people don't just sit in their office one day and think, actually, we need to be more inclusive. So is there normally an incident or a trigger or something that sparks, I need to go and have a conversation with someone like yourself about this?
Sometimes it can be reactive. And that's then a different challenge, isn't it? Because that could be that could have escalated. You know, that could be that could have become legal by that point. If an organisation, if within an organisation there's been some form of discrimination and that has escalated, that's a difficult situation to find yourself in. And then it goes back to that piece. Well, this is happening because this has happened, not because we think it's the right thing to do, even, but we know that we need to now. So that's another conversation. But it can help in the awareness raising. It's like, this is, why did that happen? How have we got to this? And then it's that period of self-reflection that then takes people to that next level. But mostly, Steve, what I find is that people are trying to be proactive about this, because it's not new. Like I said, it's not new, and it's not just about a group of people. It's about everybody in the organisation. You want to come to work and feel just as valued as you do and as I do. So, and if we don't feel that, that's when we start looking what else is out there, because there'll be somewhere that does offer you that.
And that, I guess that's one of the ways you sell it to the MD, the board, by it's not necessarily about having a diverse workforce. It's about recruiting the best talent, retaining the best talent, delivering the best results at the end of the day.
Absolutely,
you do that by diversity. One of the things you mentioned earlier was that you've done some work in Saudi Arabia, which didn't strike me as the most diverse and inclusive country to do work in, if I'm honest. So what's your experience of Saudi Arabia?
Well, first of all, you're not the only person that said that to me when I've told them a little bit about my background and where I've worked. I think there's a lot of reinforced stereotypes in the media about the Middle East, and particularly Saudi Arabia. You know, it has been known as one of the most conservative Muslim countries in the world, and people's understanding may be limited of what the culture is and what it means and how it works. But when I was there, I went in 2015, and I went to work out there in education, and we were actually helping young women prepare for the workforce, because Saudi Arabia has this vision for 2030 that they want to reduce dependency on oil, they want to diversify their workforce, and so they need to take steps in order to make that happen. So there's a lot of focus on gender diversity, so making sure that women have the necessary skills, but also access to the workforce. So we were there helping with that, and since then there's so much more focus on it since I left as well, and also in terms of leadership development. So coming back to these inclusive practices and being an inclusive leader, how can we support that? Just as an example, recently working with an organisation that is looking at its talent development. So how inclusive and how equitable is that? Because traditionally it was, you're sitting here next to me, we've got quite a good relationship, I've got a position opening up, Bax, how about taking that job? And then what we're seeing now is, you know, people coming into an organisation and they want a career path. They want to be able to see how they can develop. What they don't want to see is you getting the job because you were sitting next to me. So it needs to be equitable. So it's putting in place frameworks and talent development planning and policies to make sure that they've got a more equitable practice within their organisation. So again, it's small steps, and like I say, it's dependent on every individual organisation. So it's not always we need to change everything. It might be just one or two things that could make a really big difference. And then what you start to see is people are not leaving because they're not looking for another role where that talent development is being offered, because they've got it where they are, and then you've got the loyalty. So you're not, you know, that's again going back to the business benefits and why should people do it? Because you don't want to be spending all of your budget on recruitment, do you? That's, you know, you want to get that talent, you want to keep it.
It makes sense.
I'm really glad you asked about Saudi Arabia, actually, because you just said something there which I think really illustrates the whole point really well. It's like And it's not like it necessarily should. It'd be nice if it was just like, well, let's just do it because it's the right thing to do and it's a nice thing to do, right? But actually, like Saudi Arabia realizing that, well, actually, our country, our culture, the future of our country will be miles better, and is actually dependent on empowering people and pushing out these sort of changing this perspective around women in the workplace, etc., because we actually need that to happen. So then all of a sudden you have this big push, because even like in this part of the world, we really take things for granted, don't we? But like even men and women working together in like a country like Britain, it's a relatively new thing. 50 years ago, probably, our grandparents or whatever, this wasn't really the norm for them to be working in an office with, it's like the men go to work here and the women go to work there, and even like it's silly, but like female bus drivers, like, or female taxi drivers. I remember asking when I was really little, like, why don't women, like, I never see any women like picking us up in a taxi, like why is that? And there was all these it's not safe and blah 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 whatever, and it just until the point where I remember the first time a woman pulled up in the taxi and I was just like, what is going on? Like, and not because I don't think women should be able to drive a taxi, but just because I was so used to just seeing this narrative that just seemed like completely unusual to me.
You're right, actually. Yeah, I think our generation is probably the second generation where it's been very normal for females to work. Yeah, my grandparents.
And then combine race into that, combine sexuality into that, which again, in a place like Hull, it's not racially diverse, right? So even if for whatever reason you think, I want to make friends with a black person, you're going to have to force that to happen, right? But at the same time, the amount of media that we're exposed to on a global scale, because we are now a global community, and we're starting talking about Saudi Arabia, and they're part of the conversation. All these countries are now part of this conversation. It's like, we know that there's all these different types of people out there that have these different perspectives and different cultures, and we engage in like media and stuff that we enjoy, and we get value out of like experiencing those different cultures. And even if we like go on holiday or whatever, more and more people don't just want to go to a country where there's like, where it's been like anglicized. That's
a good word. I like that. Yeah.
Where it's just like they've kind of changed to fit
English breakfast, €5.
Yeah. Exactly, right? People want to go to the places where they actually get to be part of the culture and experience stuff. And like you were saying about the Ganesh festival,
that's right, yeah.
Being able to be part of that. Yeah. And again, even for you, as someone who comes from, let's say like a minority group, still kind of having this inner turmoil thinking, but is it all right for me to involve myself in this? Is that appropriation, whatever? And what I often find, and I think we all find, and you experience firsthand there, is most people, they want to welcome you into their culture.
Yeah.
They're not thinking, oh, you just appropriating like my culture. No, do it. Buy the clothes, wear them. Like, we're proud of these things. We want to see people going out there and doing these things.
Yeah, but I will just say, from a cultural appropriation perspective, yes, appreciate it, buy it, wear it, but understand it.
Yeah.
Fair take point. The time to understand it and what it represents, and respect that.
Yeah.
And then, absolutely, I think. But that's the difference, isn't it? In terms of that, for example, that experience I had on Saturday.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of what it was. If I'd have just rocked up, for example, and started dancing and joining in, and this is a really serious Hindu festival that's happening. Yeah. That would have been, well, it wouldn't have been great, would it, for a start? But the fact that, I was like, right, well, let's ask somebody who may or may not know, but we'll find out from somebody what this is about. And then it was having that invitation. So it's having that,
and I
it's
think you're right.
respecting the boundaries, isn't it?
It's a balance, isn't it? And it's like what we're saying about, like, it's all a bit of a process, and there's going to be clumsiness and awkward moments and stuff. But as long as, something I've recently discovered, because I've been doing a lot of work on myself and the way I view the world, the way I view myself, and it's like, really all it comes down to is giving the other person the most sort of compassionate interpretation of their actions and behaviour, and just assuming that like people don't always get things right, but generally speaking, most people have good intentions.
Yeah.
And usually they're a good person, but they're just doing a clumsy or a bad thing. It's not. Most people are not bad people. Yeah. You know, and again, in scenarios like that, what I often see is you probably will get someone who's all clumsy comes up trying to just force themselves into a scenario, and rather than that group getting real defensive about it, they're just like, all right, well, you know, we're busking here, let's see where this goes. And then you get this moment of like, there's a proper connect, there's something going on there, and that becomes a catalyst, and then maybe that person, they go away and suddenly they think they see a show on Netflix that they would have ignored because it's got an all Arabic cast, let's say, and they go, oh, I think I might put that on actually. And the next thing they're booking a holiday to go to, you know, not Turkey, but because I feel like that's quite anglicised or whatever. But you see my point, like it creates this chain effect, and it just really takes all of us to just kind of just, you know, and probably more so on people such as yourself and yourself and me. Is that good grammar?
It'll do.
Yeah.
I'm not judging you back, because I've already said I'm not judging you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
There is that cancel culture problem where if you are clumsy, if you do put your foot in it, then you can get called out to the world.
And that's not healthy. And actually, it's not healthy. It's not helpful. And that that environment will actually, I think, put a lot of MDs and leaders off of even going in that direction, because it's like, our whole company could be tarnished in one moment of someone just being a bit of a dick and being clumsy and getting it wrong, and before anyone's had an opportunity to explain themselves or whatever, could be just a totally honest misunderstanding, but it's on Instagram 10 minutes later, and the whole world knows, and then people are using it as a way to like be an activist off the back of it and all this other stuff.
To be outraged. And that's the thing, isn't it? And you're absolutely right. You know, we are living in a world at the moment where there's an awful lot of this cancel culture happening, and I am in agreement with you. I don't think it's helpful. I think even if somebody has views that are polar, couldn't be more polar opposite to mine, I'm happy for us to sit down and have a conversation and talk those through, and so I can understand you and your perspective, and you can try to understand me and my perspective, and maybe we can find a way forward, or maybe we just agree to walk away and I leave you in peace and wish you well. But you're absolutely right. In terms of company reputation, I think a lot of leaders are quite tentative in the steps that they're taking towards this, particularly in this current climate, because there's a culture war going on, you know, and we can't ignore that. And so I think people are afraid as well to kind of step in and get caught up in that, and it can get political, and it shouldn't, but it does. So yeah, I think there's some avoidance from that for fear, and again, not knowing how do I deal with this, but then sometimes not saying anything can be just as problematic, because it's like, if you're on the fence all the time, where's the trust? So your clients, your customers are like, well, what's your position? Well, we're going to go here because it's very clear what theirs is. So that loyalty shifts, the trust shifts. So it really is a balancing act.
Is that the way the world's going, or the industry's going, where businesses have to lay out their position, like on the environment? This is our position on the environment. This is our position on diversity.
I think on certain points it's becoming an expectation. I mean, ESG is a big one, isn't it, for businesses, and a lot of businesses are making those positions very clear. But you make your position clear, but then what are you doing about it? So it's fine to have, say, for example, a diversity and inclusion policy, or you've got a statement up on your website, but what's happening in the day-to-day, because that's what's going to shift the needle. Not having a policy,
Agreed.
Not having a strategy. It's what's happening in the day-to-day. What are those water cooler moments like? What's the atmosphere like when you walk into a room? What's it like when you sit in a meeting? Are you shut down? Are you interrupted? Or are you given space to say your piece? So they're the things that really create it. And another thing is that they're all quite intangible, aren't they? So it can be hard to measure. And a lot of leaders want numbers. What's the ROI on this? So yes, we can measure some things. We can look at recruitment, we can measure and we can track the data on that and see, right, are we recruiting more diversely? Are we up, but not just recruiting, are we then creating a pipeline and making sure that promotions are happening relative to what the demographic of the workforce is? We can measure that. It's harder to measure how somebody feels. So I think, having that quantitative data, but then also remembering to get the qualitative data as well, because that's where you're going to see the most impact, I think, in what people actually tell you.
Yeah, I agree. That's where you get the insights, and it's sitting down and having a face-to-face with somebody independent like yourself instead of their bosses.
Yeah, because it can be just harder, can't it, to open up to somebody. And again, you can't just declare this is a psychologically safe culture, because if it's not, it's not.
It's kind of incongruent.
People are not going to speak up. But if you create one by having a non-biased third party, for example, people might be more willing to open up. But again, it's a process, and you have to manage your expectations in terms of what's going to happen and how long it's going to take for the change to be felt and seen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Last question. So the podcast is called Tomorrow's Workplace Today. So we always ask the guest, if you could cast your mind forward sort of 10 years, what does the workplace look like, or what's different? What's going to be different about the workplace in 10 years' time versus today?
Is this in terms of
it could be anything really, but I guess within your domain, or if there's other stuff that you think will emerge over the next 10 years. Then.
I mean, obviously with the rise of automation and artificial intelligence, I think we're going to see a lot more jobs automated. So I think people are possibly going to have more time, and so not necessarily working physically. I think people are going to be working in different locations, so we've got hybrid and flexible working now. I think that's only going to increase. And that's another reason to really focus on inclusion, because how do you create an inclusive culture when people are spread out all over, working different times? So I think technology is really going to affect the way that we work and do business with each other. I think it's going to open up so many opportunities for us to work far, far and wide. We're already doing it, aren't we? But I think it's going to open up even more opportunities for us. And that, again, for me, is where this inclusion comes in. But, just to bring in something new, but I won't go into it in too much detail, but you've got IQ, which is how we've, traditionally measured people's intelligence. And then we've kind of moved into this era of EQ, emotional intelligence. But for me, it's about cultural intelligence, and that, more than anything, is what people need. If you can't communicate with people who are not the same as you, we're really going to struggle moving forward.
Love that. We will leave it there. Tanya, thank you very much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been great to have you.
Thank you. Mate. Thank you very much.
Time for food now, I think.
Yeah, let's do it. I've got a bacon and brie sandwich somewhere.
Nice.
Oh yeah.